Lisa the Painful was a game that was released on December 15, 2014 by Dingaling, an independent developer responsible for the creation of the Lisa saga. Lisa the Painful was a game that was released on December 15, 2014 by Dingaling, an independent developer responsible for the creation of the Lisa saga. The Lisa saga is a series of 3 games: Lisa the First, Lisa the Painful, and Lisa the Joyful. Lisa the Painful is considered the primary game in the saga. Essentially, think of Lisa the First as a prequel and Lisa the Joyful as a sequel, as opposed to viewing them as 3 equally important parts of a whole. Lisa the Painful is a game that takes place in a post-apocalyptic society where some strange event, coined as the Great Flash by characters in the game, calls all women to die out. The world of Lisa is plagued by men who have come to terms with the idea that the human race is doomed and society completely collapses as a result. The main character, Brad, is a man who randomly finds a human baby laying on the ground one day. Upon bringing it back to his house, he discovers that the child is a girl. Despite being faced with this seemingly impossible miracle, Brad and his friends are somber because they know that her life will likely be miserable as the only woman in a society entirely filled with men. They understand that the child, whom they name Buddy, will be used as a martyr for the survival of humanity, and that she will be treated as more of an object than she ever will be a human. In the end, Brad decides to become a secret foster father to Buddy. The 4 men watch her grow up together, shielding her from the outside world, until one day when she is found and kidnapped by a powerful group of mercenaries called the Rando Army. Brad's goal throughout Lisa the Painful is to retrieve Buddy and bring her home. Throughout Lisa, a large emphasis is placed on a drug called joy. The opening scene of Lisa introduces joy as the main method in which Brad confronts his trauma. There is an obvious thematic connection between the role that the drug plays in Brad's life and the drug being abstractly named joy. In Brad's montage at the start of the game, where he takes care of Buddy, we see him try and fail to quit joy. There's a lot to be gauged from observing Brad's mannerisms and physicalities. He doesn't talk much, he's stoic, he's scarred, and he's tough. Even though Brad has joy, he clearly isn't happy. Besides Brad's clear personal and mental struggles, he also faces several physical challenges throughout his journey. These come in forms both human and not. On many occasions, Brad is faced with the human-esque abominations that are littered throughout the world. These monsters are largely unexplained until about halfway through the game, when Brad finds an abandoned research facility that also doubles as a residential area or a neighborhood. This area adds to the motif that surrounds neighborhoods in Lisa, where suburban houses are often portrayed as being run down and sinister under the surface. The enemies in this area mostly take the form of disturbing monsters who can barely even be classified as human, adding to the implied mystery and horror of the facility. When Brad makes it to the basement of one of the houses, he finds a monster simply called Doctor. Upon Doctor's defeat, Brad finds a research log that terrifyingly reveals the fact that everybody who takes joy will eventually turn into a monster themselves. Brad, a monster in the making, is surrounded by that which he will become. Although not discussed by the characters in-game, the foreboding implications for the player are immense. Brad will eventually turn into a monster, and there's nothing he can do to stop it. In the game's first act, Brad meets a character by the name of Buzzo. Buzzo's appearances are always masked in mystery as he leads a gang known as the Joy Boys and stalks Brad throughout the game. Buzzo's sheer resilience represents more than just another human trial for Brad to overcome in his search for Buddy. Instead, Buzzo more so represents a concept, the concept of addiction. Every time Buzzo appears before Brad, he offers him a game-altering choice. During his first appearance, Buzzo offers Brad the choice of either cutting off his own arm or letting one of his party members die. If Brad chooses his own arm, then he is permanently crippled for the rest of the game. It halves all his stats and bars him from using any attacks that require both his arms. If Brad instead chooses to sacrifice one of his party members, then that person is permanently killed, leaving a power vacuum in the player's team. If Brad chooses to do neither, then Buzzo does both. This is not the last instance of Buzzo forcing Brad into a situation that is impossible to win. He appears several more times throughout the game to force Brad to make similarly terrible decisions. Buzzo is likely meant to represent the effect that drug addiction and abuse has on Brad. Brad's addiction is persistent and it forces him into bad situations, much like Buzzo, the person, does. Not to mention that Buzzo's literal name is similar to Buzz, a feeling that is associated with the act of taking harmful substances just for short pleasure. Joy also has purposes outside of just being a narrative set piece. Yup, that's right guys, Lisa the Painful does not suffer from ludonarrative dissonance. In battle, Brad has periods of withdrawal where all his normal attacks start doing no damage. To remedy this condition, which by the way happens completely at random, Brad must take Joy, which puts him in an alternate state known as Joyed. When Brad is Joyed, all his attacks do ridiculous levels of damage, however the ending of Brad's high always gives way to another state of withdrawal. In general, Lisa has many gameplay quirks such as this. As previously mentioned, Lisa the Painful is an RPG. This means that Lisa shares many of the same tropes and normalities as other RPGs, such as having an experience system, having turn-based combat, and having classes for the characters. However, Lisa's classes really aren't conventional ones. Traditional classes like mages, knights, and rogues are exchanged for less conventional ones like truck driver, luchador, drunkard, and cat herder. While strange, these classes summarize who each of the characters are meant to fundamentally be. Despite the unique class that each character has, Brad might have the most unorthodox class of all, with his simply reading nobody. And that's exactly what Brad has been reduced to throughout his life, a nobody. The harshness of the world in Lisa is also expressed in other aspects of the actual gameplay, such as the disposability of Brad's party members. Instant kill attacks can permanently kill individual party members without warning, and the game seems not to care about doing so. There isn't a fanfare that accompanies the death of Brad's companions, they just kinda die. The game also pushes this concept of teammates being disposable by making it incredibly easy to replace them, as Brad is given the opportunity to recruit such a large amount of fodder during his journey that it's really easy for him to just swap them out if something does happen. Aside from the Joy monsters, Brad faces a number of strangely disturbing people during his journey. One of the most prevalent encounters being the Marty spiders. These encounters only happen in the dedicated nightmare sequences of Brad's journey, being delusions that Brad undergoes as a result of his childhood trauma. These sequences always contain enemies that appear as spiders with the head of Marty, Brad's father. These enemies are incredibly fast in the overworld, and the sheer number of them usually tempts the player to completely avoid the spiders as opposed to fighting them individually. This avoidance is further backed by the fact that the spiders don't give the player basically any experience, making fighting them a worthless endeavor. Even if Brad does quote-unquote win the fight with his father in his head, convincing himself of his superiority to his father doesn't end up with Brad being in a better position or mental state than he was to begin with. Between Lisa's death, his mother's leave, and Brad's masculine lifestyle under his father, it's fair to say that he never really had any major female influences throughout his childhood. Female influence in the lives of children is pivotal in development, such as the development of emotional and social skills. As such, Brad grew up to be cold and callous, never really having a clear state of mind mentally or emotionally. The post-apocalyptic world of Lisa reflects this in several ways. Firstly, from a conceptual standpoint, by having the world be completely devoid of all women. And secondly, from a physical standpoint, having the world be full of rocky, mountainous landscapes and infertile deserts where the life is scarce. Much like Brad's mental and emotional state throughout the game, the world of Lisa is on the verge of death, having the life snuffed out by a lack of nurturing. Backpedaling to Lisa the First, the prequel to Lisa the Painful, it is revealed that Brad runs away from home sometime during his adolescence, leaving Lisa to live with Marty alone. Brad offers to take Lisa with him, but she decides not to. As a result of Brad's leave, Marty's abuse of Lisa gets worse and worse until she makes the decision to hang herself. One thing is made clear from the events of Lisa the First. Brad feels an immense guilt for what happened to Lisa. Brad feels like Lisa if he hadn't selfishly left her to fend for herself. While most people would insist that Brad didn't do anything wrong and that his actions were rational for a child who was being abused, Brad doesn't view himself in the same light. Brad views himself as being responsible for the death of his younger sister. Brad's guilt is reflected through reoccurring images of both Lisa and Marty appearing in the game. Small bursts of rage can even seep out from Brad's largely dead face, permeating the screen in red intestinal patterns. And a very real argument can be made that Brad's guilt causes his many acts of selfishness. As for a genuine analysis on Brad, thought must be put not only towards Brad's story, but in the way that it is revealed to the player. One of Lisa's greatest strengths is the game's ability to make Brad seem justified in what he does. The opening cutscene establishes Brad as a good person with a tortured existence, defending a friend of his when he's getting bullied, and then being harshly punished by his father for doing so, going as far as to end with Brad sobbing in his room. All of this greatly builds the empathy that the player feels for Brad. After this, the game shows Brad's life in the aftermath of the apocalypse. Brad is hopelessly addicted to joy, and he is largely devoid of purpose until finding Buddy. All of these factors combine to draw forth an intense sympathy from the player. Even with the montage after the opening scene showing Brad's decline, it never really dawns on the player until later in the game that Brad truly may not be acting out of a genuine want to do good, but rather out of a selfish desire to clear himself of any personal guilt. And Brad often lashes out in bursts of anger and selfishness that erupt from this guiltiness. One such example comes in the form of one of the hardest to watch scenes in the entire game. After Brad has been journeying for a while, he finds Rick, one of his friends who helped to raise Buddy in her earlier years. However, Rick tries to run away from Brad. Brad catches Rick and restrains him by tying him to a pole. He then proceeds to beat Rick when he doesn't want to tell him anything about where Buddy is. The player controls Brad up until the first time that Brad hits Rick with the bat. After that, the game takes control of Brad, forcing him to violently mutilate Rick. Throughout the investigation, Rick reveals that he and Sticky decided to give Buddy up to the Rando army, as they would take better care of her than any of the four friends could. Rick points out that keeping Buddy from the world is an inherently selfish action, especially when she could end so much suffering and literally save the human race. This scene not only leaves a profound impact on the player, but also alludes to Brad's eventual transformation into a monster without choice or emotion. Brad chases Buddy throughout the game. However, when he catches up to her, she doesn't seem to want to come with him. Buddy realizes her importance to the world and tells Brad that she doesn't want to come back with him. Buddy goes as far as to say that it was Sticky, one of Brad's friends who helped raise Buddy, who, quote-unquote, showed her what it meant to be a girl. Despite this, Brad keeps pursuing her. In the ending scene of Lisa, the Rando army has Buddy, and Buddy has made it obvious that she will cooperate with them in order to save humanity. About 20 men stand between Brad and Buddy. Inhuman odds lay at the feet of Brad. However, before he can even attempt to fight the army, his party members stop him. After trying and failing to stop Brad, Brad fights and kills all of his companions. Then, as Brad turns back to the army, the intestinal pattern of selfishness and rage envelops the screen, and Brad, through an inhuman series of battles, almost effortlessly slaughters the entire army. The fight is quite one-sided at that, with the men calling Brad a monster throughout the massacre. Despite the fact that Brad hasn't turned into a monster yet, a part of him is already past the point of being human. After killing Rando, there are no more obstacles between Brad and Buddy, and the two share a conversation as Brad slowly dies from his injuries. Buddy asks Brad why he did all that he did. She makes it obvious that she doesn't want to be with him and that he's been a terrible father to her. Brad acknowledges this, but says to her, "For good or for evil, it didn't matter. Those men wanted to use you." This line perfectly summarizes Brad's character. Brad, the abused child, the wrongly blamed, the broken man, has been used his entire life, and it's his biggest regret. Brad's entire journey has not been dedicated to the effort of rescuing Buddy and giving her a good life, but rather for the sake of alleviating Lisa from Brad's memory and preventing Buddy from becoming the monster that Brad views himself as. Brad is indeed a victim, and his guilt is contrived from an event of which he did not cause. Brad did not cause Lisa's suicide, but he feels the need to redeem himself anyways. Brad's experience with abuse makes him selfish. The ending scene of the game adds more thought to this tragedy. After the credits roll, the game unexpectedly cuts back to the red screen and then to Brad, only Brad has taken on a very different form. Just as foreshadowed previously in the game, Brad, through his uses of joy, has transformed into a mutilated, inhuman monster. He crawls into a nearby house where Buddy lays. She lies on the ground, surrounded by joy, a testament to the true failure that Brad has been. In his journey to desperately stop Buddy from suffering what he did, she ends up in the same place that Brad was in at the start of the game. However, quite possibly the most profound thing about this scene is that Brad, with his last breath, staring at Buddy's body, does not call out for her. He instead calls out for Lisa.